My name is James Friedrich, James Friedrich.
Awesome. That way we can get your auto search done the right way. So where do you live, and have you always lived here?
So I currently live in North Platte, Nebraska. I was born and raised in North Platte, then moved to the Lincoln area in the Omaha, and moved back to North Platte about 22 years ago.
So give people a context of where is North Platte? Well, first off, they'll know where Nebraska is because of the video, but where within Nebraska is North Platte? And kind of explain this part of Nebraska versus eastern Nebraska, and if you see a difference in it. What the life is between North Platte versus Omaha, Lincoln. The alphanumeric license plates versus the non.
So North Platte is, as you look at Nebraska, we're the one oddly shaped state in the center of the country, and where the panhandle is, North Platte would be where the corner of that is just 50 miles east of that, if that gives you an idea of where North Platte would be.
Famous for? What historic or what do people know North Platte for? Should they know North Platte for?
Wild Bill Cody and the railroad.
So those were two big things. So
yeah.
When you say the railroad, what railroad? And if people don't know Wild Bill Cody, give them a little love.
So Union Pacific Railroad, North Platte has the largest switching yard in the world in North Platte. And then Wild Bill Cody took, I guess, ranching or the rodeo all throughout Europe and became famous for that.
Are there any big festivals that happen out here?
There is Nebraska Land Days that happens every year, which is a Western lifestyle event that has the rodeo and dancing and country concerts, and they have added rock for those who don't like country.
Is that happening this year?
No.
Because I think it usually happens right about now,
right? We're close to that date.
June-ish.
I don't.
Okay. These are ad-lib questions because I think it's fascinating. Most people don't know the difference there's differences in Nebraska. So what would you miss most if you had to leave North Platte tomorrow?
If I had to leave North Platte tomorrow, I'd probably miss my friends.
What is one thing you would want people to know about North Platte who've never been to North Platte?
So probably one of the best things about North Platte is just that it's a small community where families are important and good place to raise a family. So even though there may not be much for your children to do, you know where they're at.
So what's been your origin story? What have you done over this arc of your life to get you to this point, and what do you do now?
So born and raised in North Platte, had parents that ran a business locally, worked in that industry, which is the office products, furniture, and equipment. Went to University of Nebraska-Lincoln for college, a business college. Worked for another surprise office furniture equipment dealership in the Lincoln and Omaha area. Moved back to North Platte and purchased that business from my family, and then sold that a few years ago. Started a marriage counseling ministry, and then over the last 6 months have been working just part-time for a trucking industry. So still counseling, but...
What was, explain your marriage counseling operations. What did that all entail? What does it look like for someone who, if someone was looking at it, what would you want to tell them about it?
So our marriage counseling looked a little bit different than most. It was a week-long intensive counseling, about 20 hours of counseling in a week. And
Where do they come? Where do your clients come from? Usually?
Most of them come from out of state. We're associated with a ministry that's out of Colorado Springs, and so there's some seminars that go on that we've participated in, and then a lot of clientele come from those seminars that have been done.
In 2 words or less, how would you describe the year 2020? And then why did you choose those 1 or 2 words?
2 words or less. What 2020, describing 2020. Unexpected.
Why?
Obviously the COVID and really the shutting down, social distancing, that had a big impact on our family. We've got 3 children, 1 in college, so our son came home. Our other 2 children were no longer in school, and so they were home and adjusting to that. Took a fair amount. It was fun to watch our children learn how to be all under the same roof again. And it was a challenge for mom and dad also. Then obviously with the George Floyd and the rioting that has taken place, and just really the sadness of division that's taken place.
So how did your daily life change at first, when it first broke out? What were the big changes?
The biggest changes were having our children at home all day long and attempting at our best to help them with their education. Yeah, that was probably the most difficult and biggest thing. Melissa not going into the office, me not going into the office. That was so just learning how to have 5 people under one roof 24 hours a day.
How did that affect you emotionally then?
So it affected me emotionally. I typically try to put other people first, just with some of the things that I grew up with, and wanting to care for others, and having to then walk through that with Melissa at times, where it's like saying, I feel like I'm the last one getting my cup filled, and her then seeing that and going, oh, I think I can fill that need. So it was difficult, but yet good to walk through some of that stuff.
What kind of habits or routines have you gotten into that you actually think you'll keep once things kind of get back to a degree of normal?
Being purposeful in walking into my children's room, and obviously 5 people in the house. There were times where it would, separate, and children in their bedrooms, and it was easy to, just be self-focused, and I could watch a Netflix video of my own, but to purposely go into my children's rooms and into their lives to see what was going on with them.
So what's life like now that we're about 100 days into this whole pandemic? Have you seen a shift in your daily life again?
So we've gone back to pre-pandemic life. We don't have restrictions on our children anymore, and so things are pretty much back to normal.
Why have you made that shift?
So being in North Platte, our community, I think we've had 2 cases in the last 3 weeks. So I don't know, the threat doesn't seem that ominous anymore. And the vast majority that have contracted it locally have recovered. And so...
Do you know anyone that has had COVID?
So there was a nursing home in, I think, not Myrna, but there was a nursing home near Broken Bow that there was an outbreak there, and they brought all the patients then to the local hospital. And there was one gal that I'd worked with, her mother was in that nursing home, and she was brought then to the local hospital, and she did die about 4 weeks later.
So, what's been the biggest challenge for you during this pandemic?
Biggest challenge during the pandemic. And my biggest challenge through the pandemic is seeing the disparity, or the two ends of the spectrum, where people will stand and say, oh, it's not that bad, it's just like the flu, and other people that it's the worst thing since the Spanish flu, and where the truth actually lies. And some of that is just going to come out with time, but that's been difficult for me to wrestle with.
So how does this pandemic compare to any other big challenges that you've experienced in life?
So as far as big challenges, this is really fairly small. And watching your own parents struggle through their marriage to eventually end in a divorce, that's something that affects you emotionally, where physical stuff, I don't think is nearly as hard as some of the emotional things that we face.
So, did you want to talk about your mom, losing your mom? Are you open to that? So,
If you make me cry, big jerk.
We've got Ride next to you if you want to use that. So, what was it like to lose your mom during the COVID era?
And so losing my mom during COVID, that was a real challenge. She lives in St. Louis. I'm in North Platte. It's a 10-hour drive. With those restrictions in the state saying if you left the state of Nebraska that you had to self-quarantine for 2 weeks. And obviously that could affect you financially. But knowing that I wanted to have some of those conversations with my mom, and I wanted to have no regrets at the point in time where she passed. And so that was difficult. My sister lives in the St. Louis area, and she was obviously very concerned about it. She's got her husband's mother is diabetic, compromised immune system. But still knowing I wanted to go and see my mom before she passed away, because they'd given her a diagnosis of less than 6 months. And so at some point, we made the decision when we were very vigilant to begin with and make sure that we social distance and didn't do anything, because we knew we wanted to go down and see mom. And so we did. But that was, I guess there were pros and cons. The few visits that I got before she did pass away, I made sure that I was very purposeful in the visits.
So what was it like for your kids who were going through milestones not to have the typical, as a parent, what was it like as a parent to watch your kids not go through the typical high school and early college milestones that normally would have happened without a pandemic?
It was disappointing. In our son and some of the hijinks, being a freshman in college, and the things that he was enjoying and the things that they wanted to do that were probably would have been frowned upon if the college would have known about them, but not being able to finish some of those things, not be able to say those goodbyes, the friendships that were made, that was disappointing.
Where was your son? Tell the story of your son, where he was when it all went down.
And so Lucas, when everything started to shut down, was in Sedona, Arizona with his roommate and his roommate's family, really having a great time. And that was hard to have to call him and say, I don't know if you're looking at email while you're out having fun, but here's the deal. When you get back, we've got 48 hours to pick you up, and college is done. It's going to be online. And then also another challenge was then the next day having to call our son and say, Grandma's been diagnosed with cancer and been given less than 6 months. Because our nephews knew about it, and we didn't know if they were going to post anything on social media. And the last thing you want your son to do is hear that his grandma was going to pass away by social media and mom and dad not telling him.
What about your other children? Where are they in their life, and what was happening? What did they not get to experience, and how did that make you feel?
So our middle daughter was in a play at the high school, and the day before they were to have their first performance, everything got shut down. So that was disappointing for her to put in that work of months of work and not being able to perform live. We did get to see it live streamed because they did record it, but it's not the same as being able to perform.
So you're of the age where you have a lot of graduation parties and all that stuff. What was this season like as a parent watching all that stuff happen?
I mean, this is to say it was surreal not to have the graduations is probably an overplayed word, but it just didn't seem. And you just kind of not exactly sure the right words to describe it. But we've got a nephew that is probably not going to have a graduation there in St. Louis. And that's disappointing. I mean, there's a lot of fun that goes along with that graduation ceremony and time with friends that he doesn't get to have. But yeah, that's...
What about the lack of proms? What was that like?
I'm sure the lack of proms was very disappointing to a lot of girls. But even our daughter, we had picked out shoes, which it's embarrassing to say that I was with her and picking out shoes, but she got a great deal on shoes and it only cost her $15, and she was so proud of herself, and she was as tall as me wearing her shoes, and she'd gotten her dress and her shoes, and then to have nothing happen was disappointing.
How do you think daily life will feel like 2 years from now?
I don't know. Two years from now, we may, and this is where I had said earlier, we may see that the pandemic, maybe it wasn't as big of a deal as what we thought it was. Or maybe it is, and we're going to look back and go, holy cow, that was... And there were a lot of people that, and don't get me wrong, there were have been a lot of people that have died, but if it gets worse in the fall and we double the amount of deaths, we're going to look back on it and go, oh my goodness, that was astronomical.
So, in the challenges that you see in your business and your work, and in your community here at North Platte, what that kind of have maybe become more pronounced within the pandemic era and all the things that go with it. What excites you about solving them?
So what excites me about solving them, so I'd been in the office products industry, and I don't know if it was a great choice of mine, but I purchased a company along the times where, you know, the Staples and the Office Depot and the Office Max became big. Now, what it did is, you know, there was a time period about 5 years, there were about 40% of all the independent businesses that were in the office products industry closed their doors because they couldn't compete, didn't know how to compete. But those that made it through that, they became more wise and more efficient in how they did business. And so when we come out of this on the other side, there's going to be an efficiency or just an understanding, and whether it's an understanding of how pandemics run, but my hope is that there's a learning process that takes place to where we're better on the other side.
So, what was your reaction to the George Floyd incident, and then what kind of observations and reactions did you see in the community to it, and the resulting kind of protests that came about?
So, and seriously, my reaction to the George Floyd thing, the shooting and his death, it's heartbreaking. And you get, unfortunately, an individual gets politicized on both sides of the spectrum. But he has his own story. And it's sad, and so does the police officer. And I don't pretend to know either one of those stories. But we don't get to know the person on either side. And it's sad when one person's life gets politicized, but he's not the only one that died that week from a shooting. And so we focus on one person's life, and I'm not saying his life wasn't important. It was. But there were other people that died that same week too. And that
What was the reaction in the North Platte community to what, you know, when that hit the news? How did North Platte react?
So there were some peaceful protests in the North Platte area, and they all stayed peaceful, and it was neat. Through social media, the police were involved, and they walked with them. And it was nice to see a diversity in people that were there.
Was that kind of a different thing? Was it North Platte? Nebraska is a very predominantly white state. Though we have, I think, 11% Hispanics here. You mentioned it was nice to have a diverse crowd. Is that not normally seen? Do you not normally see a diverse crowd in North Platte?
And
like compare it to like Nebraska Land Days or any of the big festivals that happen.
I don't know. It was because we get comfortable in our own environments and have a tendency to for the most part, you'll see Caucasian whites with Caucasians and Hispanics with Hispanics. Sometimes there's just a language there that there's just a camaraderie. And growing up in the community, when I was in high school, in high school anyway, there were 2 African American families. And those guys always just hung out together. They weren't exclusive, but in the protests that took place, it was nice to see that intermingling of people.
Yeah.
And done in a purposeful way.
How you feel about the next 5 years? What do you, how would you describe how you feel about the next 5 years?
I guess I would say for the next 5 years, I'm optimistic. And sometimes my wife says that I'm overly optimistic and could run into a brick wall, but I'm like, oh, but the good thing is I know where it's at now. I mean, there's always things to learn, and my hope and my prayer is that we will learn not only from the pandemic, but George Floyd, that that it'd be nice not to see. I mean, I like to see in color, but not skin color.
So, what is the spirit of the West out here? I mean, you mentioned Wild Bill Cody. We got Nebraska Land Days. This is the largest train depot. Train switchyard, whatnot. A lot more ranches out here. There's farmlands out here. What is the spirit of Western Nebraska? How would you describe that?
So, I hate to dumb things down to just a meme, but I saw one, and it's just the top half of the picture is, we've got a social distance, and it's got this concerned look, and then it's a rancher standing outside going, "Yep, we've been doing this for years."
That's a good one, Jim.
But the spirit out here is, if we're gonna get COVID, we're gonna get it. Let's just keep going. We're not. In fact, a barber, and it can't get him in trouble anymore because now the thing's lifted and he hasn't been charged. But I went with the bad haircuts for quite a while, and then when Nebraska lifted the ban and allowed barber shops to open, I excitedly went into my barber and asked him how bad the hair looked, and he was gracious and said it didn't look too bad. But I asked him how he thought about being back open again, and he looked at me and he said, "Well, I never closed."
That is the spirit of the West right there. Is there a question I should have asked you that I haven't? What does James need to? What should I have asked you?
What should you have asked me?
Oh, I have a question for you that you're Don. You mentioned that in business, you're with your counseling, it was intensive. So, what have you been doing? How are you shifting what you're doing with your practice now?
So, I have done some video calls. It's not quite the same. There's a lot of nonverbal communication that I can pick up being face-to-face with somebody instead of over a screen. That's been a challenge. A lot of phone calls, a lot of follow-up, but yeah, as far as being face-to-face, has not happened.
Did I need to ask you a question that I haven't asked you? Is there like a juicy topic that I haven't covered that you're like dying to talk about?
Ask me if, being in Western Nebraska, if I've bought any more guns. No, I haven't. No, I don't know.
It just gets more west from here on out. All right, so this is going to be seen by people on the internet. So it may be today, it might be years from now. It might be people locally, maybe people on the other side of the world who are learning English. They just came across this video. They were radicalized on something on YouTube, right? What message would you want to share into this time capsule with people that will watch this? What's the message you want to convey to them?
So I guess the message that I would want to convey is that even though societies will ebb and flow and some things will become more important, less important, but there's one thing that doesn't change, or I guess I say shouldn't change. And I'm not sure how to say this without actually offending.
You don't have to worry about offending them, just say it.
Even though the society will change and the things that we value or don't value hold more in value, less in value, the creator of this universe, the creator of this universe doesn't change. And the evidence of that, the physical evidence of that is very clear. We still have, anyway, Nebraska, you have all 4 seasons, and it doesn't change. It's every year. It comes around. And the design of this world always speaks back to a creator, but the one thing that doesn't change is the love of God and his design. And we can look back in our, I'm going to say, fairly young lives, that we can see that values have changed from when we were in high school and the things that were valued versus now. And when we were young, the biggest thing 16-year-old boys wanted was a car. Now the biggest thing the 16-year-old want is the new iPhone. But the world we live in, the physical world we live in, still doesn't change. We still have seasons. And all that always points back to a creator. Now, how that gets portrayed, sadly, that gets portrayed in a lot of different ways. So I guess keep track of what actually doesn't change, and those are the values that we should keep.